Yo guys, I've got a spark which I'm going to use to ignite the fire for a brand new video within my miniature ranking series here on the channel, since it's the next day following up my ranking of all 8 Giants characters. I'm now going to be going back to that same game to instead rank all 8 of the cores, which I have in front of me once again. Unfortunately, my hot dog's tail did break off, so I'm going to have to get a replacement for that soon enough. And in the background you can see an Xbox 360 controller, because that represents the console from which I'm going to be capturing for gameplay for this video. But with that being said, we have returned to my face so that I can, finish alluding to exactly what I'm going to be doing in this video. It's quite obvious, the title is expressing that in and of itself. So instead, without further ado, we're going to roll the intro and get straight into ranking of all 8 cores from Skylanders Giants without further ado. Kicking our list, we have the weakest that the cores from Giants have to offer, quite literally, because I'm talking about Sprocket, a core whose power level is so low that I'd be better off playing as a sidekick even before Trap Team when they became fully playable, because Sprocket here, she definitely has an interesting moveset. It does make her unique and more distinguishable, and that in and of itself is quite memorable. So I do like the risks this character takes with her gameplay style, but unfortunately it doesn't pay off because the gameplay style is really slow paced, so the character is boring and dull, and she also dies within 2 seconds of being placed in a portal because she is left so vulnerable. Her attacks are so weak and do not pay off of a vulnerability. So overall, she's just a character that's so poorly executed that despite the really cool design and despite the great ideas, she just really comes across as terrible, for a lack of a better way of putting it. So that's what gives Sprocket the number 8 slot of a ranking right here. But moving straight along to number 7, we have Jet-Vac, a character who quite literally sucks. Yeah, that's all this character does. He sucks in enemies and he blasts them back away with his air pellets. It's really not exciting talking about it, and it's really not that exciting playing about it either. They do try to spice things up with his flight, giving him a corkscrew ability, but this is just so forward moving. It really takes away from any maneuverability the character could have. So ultimately it's not a well controlled move, and it's not fun to use because of its natural manner in the lack of its control. Jet-Vac's design is pretty cool, being an eagle with a vacuum blaster. I'm not going to deny that it looks cool, especially with the armor and everything. The blues and whites are really contrasting to make the figurine look awesome. But outside of that, his gameplay, just in comparison to the other 6 cores coming up, is nothing to write home about. And speaking of the 6 cores coming up, at number 6 we have Hot Dog, a character which is definitely vastly improved by his combinations. They give him a lot of speed and momentum in his pacing, particularly ones where he shoots forward or he fires off multiple fireballs at once. That can create some nice fluency in his moveset, and it's one of the more unique movesets in the game. But with that being said and done, his design, he's literally just a dog on fire. I'm not a dog person myself, I'm more of a cat person, even though I do love them both. But still, if he was a hot cat, I would prefer him more. So with that being said, I do think his design is particularly overrated. People calling it good just for the sake of it being a dog and them liking dogs. Although it does lead to the clever pun in his name and in his catchphrase too. So there's definitely lots of clever ideas going on with Hot Dog here. And again, I do like his combinations, but his attacks as standalones, like his slam and his firewall, just aren't all that good. And because of that, there's no real mix in the gameplay of this character. He doesn't feel fresh whilst you're playing as him, because you're just pushing the same attack buttons over and over again. And so, the very fact that this character becomes as repetitive as he does is a huge hindrance, and it gives him number 6 on the list for being, in my personal opinion, the most overrated core of this game. But number 5, on the other hand, is the complete opposite end of the spectrum, because Fright Rider, I feel like, is highly underrated. Now, if you asked me about my ranking of all these characters when the game first came out, Fright Rider would be at the very top, because I love this character. The nostalgia alone puts a huge smile on my face whenever I play as him, because I've had my particular Fright Rider for over 8 years now, which is just shocking for me to say, in all honesty. But with that being said, his combinations are really cool, they're really well animated, and not to mention they deal a massive chunk of damage. Like seriously, for one where Fright flips off Rider to create a massive laser in front of him, it's so powerful. Granted, it is slow, and it does really bring a drag to the pacing with this character, as, you know, at one moment you're charging forward, you're dragging enemies behind you, and then all of a sudden you're brought to an absolute halt to perform a slow and terribly controlled combination, mind you, because that move, it kind of travels in front of you but nowhere else, so it's hard to really aim with it, is what I'm going as far to say here. But as I said earlier, the other moves are rather fast paced. It makes this character fluent and really fun to play as. The fact that his attacks chain together really well is what makes his moveset layered and full of depth, and his design is one of the most unique. You have Fright, which is of course the elf, on top of Rider, who is his ostrich. Very clever way how they shifted up the names, because you'd expect for elf, who is riding, the ostrich to be named Rider, but that's not the case at all. It's a bit of a name swap, and that is clever. You know, I've used clever so much because that would be one word I'd use to describe Fright Rider if you were to ask me. But I'm going to bring things up to number 4 already, which is going to be none other than Smithboom. Oh, sorry, I meant Shroomboom, who has some really fun attacks. The fact that you can just mash your projectile attacks and they will bounce all over the place is really fun. It's accompanied with really fun sound effects too, as the mushrooms bounce around. It can mean that whilst Shroomboom isn't the most effective at targeting specific enemies because of the fact that his mushrooms bounce around and aren't particularly the most aimable things, what it does mean, however, is that you can be incredibly maneuverable to move around whilst you're still attacking enemies and still dealing damage. You can be running away whilst launching up your Zeppelin based attacks that, you know, rain explosive mushrooms from the sky, and from there you're all of a sudden dealing damage on all fronts. It just gives a great layer to the gameplay of this character. Not to mention you can also create a mushroom shield and then bury underneath the ground and cause a massive explosion to deal with crowd control. So ultimately, Shroomboom, with a clever mindset, has the tools to deal with any enemy that presents itself to you, and the strategy with this character, as well as just how fun it is to bring all of these moves together, is what makes Shroomboom such a strong Skylander. And ultimately his design is also really fun and lent itself nicely to channel memes, which just give me more of a nostalgia towards this character, I suppose, or more of a bias more than anything really. But just like Fright Rider, I do also have nostalgia for this character, my one in particular being again over 8 years old. So I've been playing this character for a while now, and the strategy with him is unparalleled amongst most of the other Giants cores. That includes my number 3, which is going to be Chill. A really overhated character for no good reason whatsoever. Well, she does lack strategy. What she does have to make up for that is effectiveness. You can chain her attacks together really well. Her narwhal takes barely any time to charge up, and it deals a huge chunk of damage. And on top of that, you can literally fire off, with the accompaniment of your ice balls, over 5 ice javelins at once. It's great for dealing with crowd control, and because you're maintaining your distance the whole time, you're very rarely hit, making Chill easily one of the most effective characters in the entirety of the game. And on top of that, she's also one of the most detailed. Her armor has really detailed and unique embodiments to just truly make this character feel like she belongs to an alternative society, I suppose, you know, a society of ice warriors, and that gives her character kind of like a background context to make her truly feel unique to me. And so overall, Chill has a great design with some amazing detail put into the embodiments on her armor, and her gameplay is just really effective that she's going to remain alive for a very long time. It's going to be very hard for her to be killed off by enemies who can't even get close to her thanks to her might in the projectile department. So that makes Chill worthy of number 3 in my personal opinion. Moving on to number 2, we have Pop Fizz. Easily one of the most complex Skylanders ever built up, because he has his beast form as well as his potions form, and in either form he has a very crazy, distinctive personality that no other Skylander really shares with him besides maybe Trigger Happy at a stretch, and so that makes him distinctive and memorable right off the bat. And then for gameplay, just really accompanies that. It parallels for crazy personality to where his combinations in his beast mode are just bizarre, and they run ravage, and it's such a blast to be able to deal such chaotic damage to your enemies and know that you are the one doing it. Sure, it's run on a timer, but it adds to the urgency when you're in beast mode, because you want to deal as much damage as possible before referring back to Pop Fizz's regular form. And in his potions, the fact that you can combine them down a particular path in order to strengthen them is a really clever mechanic that truly rewards players who master the moveset and combine the potions to truly experiment with a character who's all about his experimentation. It's experimentception, you could even go as far to say. But yeah, all of these things in combination make Pop Fizz great. His figurine, on the other hand, isn't the greatest. It's just his gremlin form as he's about to drink a potion. It's not as expressive as he is in the game, unfortunately. And the beast mode path is just so much more better than the potions path, where you have no motivation and no incentive to ever pick the potions path, so the imbalance there is also a big flaw in my personal opinion. And Pop Fizz in later games definitely was nerfed a little bit too much for him to be enjoyable there. But I'll tell you who was overpowered all throughout. That's going to be my #1 pick, Flashwing. Now, what's so great about Flashwing? Well, the fact that down a particular path you can create little crystal shards on the walls. These shards fire off shards of their own every single time you press the primary attack button. All of a sudden you are dealing damage to enemies in 4 different directions, and when you're done with combat you can walk up to those crystal shards and heal up. It's such an effective chain of moves to make Flashwing nearly unkillable. She is basically the closest to an invincible Skylander that you can get. Her design is awesome. She's a gem dragon, making her more distinctive and memorable than other dragons, because first of all, there's a lot of detail in her design. The texturing is phenomenal because you truly feel the scales and the gems as you rub your fingers along it, and ultimately there's just such sharp contrasting colours between the purples, the blues, the whites. It just makes Flashwing's figurine, her design in general, really memorable. The fact that her wings are made of gems rather than flesh like other dragons for the most part, or feathers, then that alone shows the unique thoughts that went into creating such a phenomenal character whose gameplay is also fast-paced, because you can spin and dash with great maneuverability to give Flashwing excellent agility, mind you. Then you can also, if you don't want to fire off crystal shards to the walls, even though you wind up doing so by accident anyway, because if you miss an enemy you can still take advantage of that and still reward yourself with the strategy of having a crystal shard up the wall. Like against an Arcane Shield Juggernaut, you can fire off a crystal shard at the wall, and then as he's targeting you, he might have his shield towards you, but your shard on the wall is still behind him, so you can fire off your shards and still deal damage. It's some excellent strategy that you can take advantage of, and above all, you know, even if you're not doing that, you can use the tertiary attack button to attack enemies on all fronts. And so no matter what, Flashwing always has a tool to deal with a particular situation, and it makes her fun, fast-paced, and I cannot emphasize enough how much I love her design and her figurine by extent, which is why she is the most worthy #1 for the ranking of the Giants cause right here. Now, with that all being said and done, this video is coming to an end, but before that happens, I first want to thank all my Blazing Knights and Scotskin Dragons whose support allow me to continue pumping out quality videos like this one. Without them, this all wouldn't be possible. Therefore, I genuinely appreciate every last one of you from the bottom of my heart. If you enjoyed this video, I have others you can watch by clicking on screen now, and you can even subscribe by pressing the button on the bottom right hand corner of the screen. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll be seeing you next one, but until that moment arises, peace!